Are we good to go? All ready? Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. I am pleased to be joined by Susan Wilkins, Executive Director of Renewable Energy, and Craig Martin, Associate Deputy Minister with the Department of Industry, Energy and Technology. Before I begin, I want to highlight the work of Susan, Craig, and their team in the energy branch, as well as support from other departments for helping us to get to this point. As you all know, this is an ambitious plan with an ambitious timeline. I committed to providing regular updates on this multi-step process, and I want the public to know that officials have been working diligently on this file, working from the ground up to develop policy for this new and emerging industry. We've worked with stakeholders to develop a multi-step competitive approach to award Crown land for wind energy projects in a manner that ensures the greatest long-term benefit to residents of our province. A manner which is fair, transparent, and competitive. Now, before we take a step forward, let's take a quick look back. 1 year ago, almost to the very day, we launched the province's Renewable Energy Plan. When we launched the plan last year to help transition Newfoundland and Labrador to a low-carbon economy, one of our short-term commitments was to review the wind moratorium that was in place for the province. And I'll point out, I think my quote at the time was sooner rather than later, I think is what I said. Skip ahead to April. We officially lifted the moratorium on wind development. In July, we issued a call for the submission of nominations of areas of interest for wind energy and hydrogen projects. This process closed on October 1st, with 73 projects proposed through 31 land nomination submissions, demonstrating a significant level of interest in this province for wind and hydrogen development. Then last month, we held virtual engagement sessions where input was used to help inform decisions about available land for the bid process. Since that time, the department has completed a detailed assessment to determine which land packages will be made available for this first round of the competitive land bid process. And today, I am pleased to announce, after engaging and receiving feedback from companies and proponents, the public, and Indigenous governments and organizations, and to ensure a fair and transparent process for all, interested companies can now submit bids for available Crown land within the areas outlined today. Now, we removed areas identified where development may be problematic or prohibited, such as endangered or sensitive wildlife habitat, protected areas and parks, protected and unprotected watersheds and supplies, mining finds of significance, active mining areas, and active farming areas. Now, the original deadline saw a total of 3.8 million hectares of land nominated. After the process, which included input from 36 departments and agencies, we are down to approximately 1.7 million hectares of land, and it's in areas where development is most likely to occur: western, central, eastern, and the Avalon. And our focus in this round is on projects for export. Bids will be accepted for the next 12 weeks from today, December 14th, until midnight on Friday, March 3rd, 2023. Once submitted, bids will go through a two-phase review process. Phase 1 will include a review of criteria to ensure companies have experience, financing, and a proposed project. Those companies that pass the initial review will then proceed to Phase 2 beginning in April 2023. Phase 2 is obviously a more in-depth review of Phase 1, as well as additional information on the proposed project, electricity grid connection requirements, community and Indigenous engagement, and benefits to the province. To ensure a fair, transparent, and competitive approval process, a guideline document was developed to outline the information that would be required of bidders and how bids will be evaluated. This public document includes the land areas available, evaluation framework, timelines, terms and conditions, as well as other relevant information needed to assist bidders. Those successful will receive a recommendation letter that provides them the right to pursue development of their project through the Government of Newfoundland and Labrador Crown Land application and approval process. I want to ensure that this is noted. An environmental assessment registration is not required during the call for land bids phase. However, prior to final awarding of Crown land, an environmental assessment will be required for wind projects over 1 megawatt. I'll add that this is the normal process for an environmental assessment. As I wrap this up for questions, the next announcement will be the fiscal framework, and I hope to have more on that in the coming weeks. A new fiscal framework for wind energy projects will take a balanced approach to ensure that Newfoundlanders and Labradorians share in the financial value from wind and hydrogen projects. And I would remind everyone of how well positioned we are as a province from a green hydrogen perspective. Abundant developed and undeveloped hydro resources, surplus energy, strong wind resources, available Crown land, available water, deep marine ports, and proximity to U.S. and European markets. I want everyone to know we will continue to ensure transparency and fairness in our development process. And I've stressed many times now before that we are taking a balanced approach to this new industry. We need to act fast, but we need to get it right at the same time. This is another step in the process. We will continue to lay the groundwork that will be beneficial, again, for the industry and for the people of this province. Before I close, I really have to commend the individuals sat next to me, Susan, Craig, and there's some other individuals, Christine, Gordon, Nina, John, Tansy, and others. I can tell everybody that this department has worked overtime for the last year. These individuals have truly done significant work in a very short period of time. And not only that, they've been extremely accessible to proponents and other interested people. And I think that deserves noting of how they've made this happen. We are certainly working at an expedited pace, and these people get the credit for that. And I'd also note our colleagues outside the department who have been working with us, questioning us. I point to my colleague Charlene Johnson with Energy NL. I look at EcoNext and other groups. They have been a part of this process. We have been, I think, upfront about trying to consult and collaborate and to listen to concerns, listen to industry, and we're taking that into this process as we go along. On that note, thank you everyone for being here, for taking part in this, and I would welcome any questions.
Minister, a draft fiscal framework for wind has gone out, just not broadly to the public. Why not release that draft and sort of the numbers that you're thinking around at this point, let the public at large weigh in?
Because that's not how it works. We have done a lot of work for the fiscal framework. I'd like to think it's extremely close to ready, but the reality is we wanted a little more consultation. We weren't quite ready to put it out. One of the other realities is that we don't exactly have a lot of precedent to look to here. There's not many hydrogen frameworks globally to look to. So we've had to do a lot of work. We've done jurisdictional analysis. We've talked to proponents. We've talked to everybody. So we're ready. We could probably have it out sometime this month, but given it's Christmas, we're going to hold off probably till early January. But that's the thing. And no, I'm not going to put out a draft right away. But what we do put out will be available absolutely to the public. People will see it. But we still want to do a little bit of work.
So how does that work, though, when that is not ready and finalized, and you're having companies now bid in this land process, effectively not knowing how they're going to be taxed or what the revenue situation is?
Because we've given them, we're going to give them over 2.5 months. So I'd point out one thing I think is important. In Nova Scotia, companies were given 2 weeks total. We're putting this out now. A couple things that I think are relevant. Number one, we're putting out the land so companies can have a look at that, see what's available, where they want to go, how it jives with what their original nomination was. I don't think anybody's going to put anything in December. That was, these companies have said, and in fact, companies have said to us, you know, take your time. In fact, we talked about going earlier. They said, you know what, extra time is not a bad thing. So that's why we've stretched it out into March, and we'll have a fiscal framework that's out well in advance of companies, I think, making that bid. So I agree with the premise. Absolutely, no one's going to make a bid without that, but we didn't want to put out something without feeling like we've done everything we can to make sure that it's a finalized version and it's the best version.
Can you explain just in layman's terms, fiscal framework, what that means,
Yeah.
and what you're hoping to achieve through the framework?
So I guess what it is that we need, again, we have proponents, companies that want to use natural resources that belong to the people of this province in order to, in this case, generate electricity, mainly for export reasons. In order to use our our resources, similar to other resources, there's a cost to that we're trying to figure out. How is that cost structure going to be? Whether that's a royalty arrangement, what is the land cost? What does it cost for wind? What does it cost for water? Things like that. So not only that, we also want to put in what are the criteria that we want to achieve as we move forward into this. Now, right now, people are very familiar, I think, with the oil formula that we use, where you bid on a piece of land and it's the highest bidder that gets it. We didn't necessarily want to go with that approach. We wanted something that took into account what their work plan was, what does their project look like, because at the end of the day, we want viable projects that will go forward, not just somebody with deep pockets coming in and tying up pieces of land, and we don't see anything out of that. We want multiple projects, number one, and we want projects that are going to happen rather than somebody tying it up. So again, that's why all these other criteria will be put in. They're all going to be weighted. What is their risk mitigation? What is their, what does their project look like? What is it that they're trying to do? What are the benefits we're going to get? What are the community benefits? What's the workforce demand that they're going to have? All those will be factored into that. And again, there has been a huge amount of work done, but as I say, I thought we were going to be ready to put it out today. I really did, but we needed a little tiny bit more time. And I think I think we have buy-in from industry on that. They're saying, you don't need to rush it. We're working, we are consulting with them. Because the other thing, again, you have an industry that in a lot of places is subsidized by the province or jurisdiction. That's not our intent here. So we can go with a system that is extremely rigorous, but requires huge upfront investment or huge requirements, and we scare everybody away, versus doing something where we don't put a sufficient enough price on our resources and we're accused of giving it away. So we're trying to find that right balance to the use of our natural resources, to getting the benefits for people for this new industry, but doing so at the same time. And there's no doubt it's I guess an area of uncertainty, because we haven't seen, this is not going on in many other places. People are working towards that. I think everybody's in the same direction. But that's sort of some of the things that are guiding us.
Is there you used the word expedited earlier on, expediting this process. Can you speak to the kind of pressure you may be feeling from companies? I mean, I know Mr. Risley talked about December needing to know generally a yay or nay if his project might be successful. He said talk about the race. Everybody's talking about the race for green hydrogen and which jurisdictions will capitalize first. What kind of pressures are you getting from the companies involved here? I
think it's a general pressure, because every company has a different mindset. There's some that want to go now. There are some that are saying take their time. In many cases, I think there's some of the pressure we're feeling from jurisdictions that need energy and want to move forward. We're seeing that type of pressure. Like everything, there's this concept going around of first mover. Everybody wants to be in that first mover. You don't want to lose your opportunity. But at the same time, we also don't want to put our foot forward and not know where we're landing. So yeah, there's absolutely been pressure, but to be honest with you, our biggest concern has been doing something that's sustainable, setting a decent foundation that we can build upon, knowing that there's a lot of things. There is a lot of uncertainty here. So we haven't been guided by pressure, but at the same time, we've listened to all the companies. Everybody has a different mindset, and we've listened to all these viewpoints in coming up with what we think is the best approach for this province.
Is there a specific component to the fiscal framework that companies want more consultation on? Like, can you provide some details about what's holding that up?
Well, generally speaking, most companies, nobody ever wants to pay for resources. I mean, that's the reality with all the projects that we have. I mean, I don't think that's a surprise. No company wants to pay for resources. They want to be able to use it. They are not for profits. And so at the same time, we get that, but we obviously realize there's a cost for resources. And it's trying to find that balance, because the other thing too is that you can price it out of the market and nobody comes here. We don't want that. We realize we have all the things to make us a success story. So that's the thing. There's not one over the other. But we've heard from them, and the biggest thing too is that we think we need to listen and heed what they're saying as one of the views that we're hearing. If not, what's the point of listening to industry, or of not listening to industry, if we're not going to take that into account when we make that plan? So we want them here, but at the same time, we also have to realize that the land here belongs to people. Many people after us, the water, these resources don't belong to us individually, to belong to us as a province. So we want to find a way to ensure that we get the best value that we can.
Given the process announced today, when do you expect to see construction begin on some of these projects?
Hard to tell right now, and again, going back to that earlier point, some have clearly indicated publicly that they want to move fast. Some others have indicated that they're not in that type of race. The other thing, too, is that we've heard generally from companies, but we'll see where this process brings us. So I can't tell you when you're going to see construction. Some have indicated to meet these 2025 objectives set out by, the federal government and Germany that they'd like to see export by 2025. I would submit that that requires a pretty ambitious timeline to build. Some others don't see themselves in that market. Right now, what we're willing to do is wait and see what comes in out of this bid process, and then we'll have a better idea. Because the other side of this, too, is that these companies haven't seen the framework. They're just seeing this today. So this may change their plans as well. So we have to recognize that they want to see where we are with this. And so, they will determine that. And again, no pressure. We're not putting pressure on anyone. But at the same time, we understand that everybody views it from their own internal lens.
You mean that they're seeing the process piece today, not the framework? Because my understanding is the framework start to circulate early December at least.
Yeah, no. They've seen it, but nobody knows with certainty where we're going to be. So they have a general idea, but like anything, until it's out there and official, I don't think they want to be going out doing the financing piece and looking for that without figuring out what this looks like.
I wanted to ask quickly about the consultations more recently. So since the last map, let's say, went out to the public, and the map that we're seeing today, there were cases where the public could call in and sit in on sessions to learn more about the process. Were there any changes specifically tied to those general public consultations where everybody could call in and participate?
There were no changes based on the public consultations, no.
Can you speak to any pushback from the public? Because we know that some of this has been quite controversial for communities. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, and I'm speaking from a general point of view here. What I both see in the media, comments that I've had, I guess meetings with communities, meetings with proponents, just people taking the time to reach out to you. I've only had pushback in really one particular area. I'd say the West Coast. I haven't had any pushback at all from anywhere else. Not hearing a thing, actually. And on the West Coast, I will point out that there's a lot of very obviously, you see is very loud questions and some people not interested in it at all. I've also had a lot of people that aren't interested in being very vocal publicly have reached out and said, we are very interested in seeing this move forward, which makes it difficult to know where does that lie. What I can say is that most communities we've consulted with are very supportive because they see the economic development side of it and the opportunities for their communities. But again, going forward, this is not the last stage. There's going to be a lot more opportunity for people to express their say. There is a social license component to this, I think. Does a company want to invest in an area where they think there's pushback? The other thing I will point out is that as we're going through this, some of the pushback I've heard, very viable, very realistic questions. People are saying, I have this concern or that. I've also heard some that are absolutely ridiculous and not based on any kind of semblance of reality. So it's trying to get in there and figure out what that real part is. I've had some people, when you dial it down and break into it, it's just political. I don't like this because I don't like a particular, I don't like this government. And not us, actually, it was more directed towards the federal government, especially after the Stephenville meeting. So we're trying to figure that out. But right now, I have not had anything expressed to me that makes me think that we shouldn't at least continue forward. I've had enough people quietly, because they don't want to be out there. They prefer to not be vocal. They've said, we really want to move forward and explore what the opportunities are. So we're cognizant of it. We listen to it, and there's going to be lots more opportunity along the process. This is going to take us till March. Then we have further reviews that go on past that. I wouldn't want anybody to say we haven't listened, because that's absolutely not the case. But at the same time, we're trying to do what we think the community wants.
You mentioned the Nova Scotia process already. We've heard some companies have already been rejected there and say they don't know why. It seems like it's a little confusing. You mentioned earlier you're not in communication with them about it, but has their process informed decision-making here?
Not really. Susan and Craig might be best to talk. I haven't had any contact whatsoever with members of the Nova Scotia government. I know officials have had different conversations, but this is the thing, is that it's one of those things where, speaking frankly, there's a collegiality to it, but at the same time, a competitiveness to it, because everybody's wanting to get in that space. So there's a bit of, you know, you want to be helpful, but at the same time, you also don't want to tell exactly what you're doing for fear of losing that advantage. We feel that we have a number of advantages here in this province. So no, we haven't really, I guess you wouldn't say informed. We've done this completely on what we've heard here in this province from proponents, communities, best practices, where you can find them, jurisdictional scans, et cetera. But yeah, there's been conversation, but nothing I would say that's guided this.
We know specifically that who the proponent is for the port-to-port. It's quite widely known publicly. They made their announcement. The two maps, the original and now the revised one, actually does eliminate some of the turbine areas proposed by World Energy. Can you explain what the rationale was for removing that land from?
So what I would say is the rationale behind removing any of the land, because I would point out to people there was 3.8 million hectares nominated. It's down to 1.8, so there's more than that area that was taken out of the equation. And it's certainly nothing we did was based on any proponent. It was based on, after going out to consultation with departments, hearing about, as I mentioned, the wildlife concerns, environmental concerns, mining issues, land issues, a whole wide range that we would hear back after we did that consultation. That's what we were left with. So the area in particular, it would have fit under one of those concerns as to why we didn't move forward with that area on the West Coast.
So you can't, for example, say that it was because of the mine there. You can't say, for example, that it was because of the mine there. There is a mine there.
I can't tell you exactly what Susan might be better off, because she would have that exact feedback that we got from all the different departments.
We do have that information. I don't have that on hand, but it was low likelihood of mitigating in that area at that time.
The guidelines talks about grid integration, interconnection, and it also talks about how there's a very limited surplus of firm capacity. Can you speak to how that's going to have an impact on what companies get approved and how this goes forward?
Absolutely. So that's one of the big considerations going forward, is right now the capacity on our grid, and I guess on both ways. So right now, there's no doubt the primary goal here is for an export situation, is not for internal use. At the same time, we do have a capacity issue when it comes to power here in the province. And again, every company's different, so I'm not saying this about one or the other, but some companies require large amounts of power, might be firm power. We might just not have that ability. So depending on what companies put forward in their bid, that may or may not have a significant role to play on whether they're viable or not. Some companies may not require that power from the grid. They may find a way to self-generate. Others are reliant on that. So we're just going to see where that comes in, and that will be factored into the decisions going forward. If you require, and that's why hydro obviously has been a big part of this, this process. I don't know if Craig has anything to add.
No, I mean, that pretty much covers it at this point. I mean, the big thing, as the Minister indicated, I mean, there's limited capacity on the grid. And again, when we say limited capacity, it's only during certain peak periods during the winter that we end up doing the limited capacity in that. So, I mean, again, things that'll factor in is the size of the company and how much firm capacity they're looking for at this point in time. Some of these proposals are relatively small, in fact, in terms of some of the companies we've heard from. Things like whether or not, if they are looking for firm capacity, whether or not they can curtail at certain times. So all of those things will factor into the decisions at the end of the day.
I think that, look, this is the first round. I do think and I hope that there will be further rounds. That's where we hope that this goes. And I do think that, look, hydro every day is working on, capacity issues. What does further expansion look like? So I do think the opportunity will come for integration into the system. But that's just not where we are at the moment. Right now, it's based very much on what is required elsewhere.
Minister, you mentioned land packages, but the land is not packaged up. What we have is a map of basically all of the land that's available for companies to submit on. My understanding is that from the public point of view, in terms of where people will get the exact look at what might be happening in their backyard, that will ultimately come through in the environmental assessment process. Is that an accurate understanding of that? Is that where people should look to for basically the information on what's gonna actually
I'm
be
gonna
happening?
turn to my right to make sure that's the case, but I think that's the case.
That
I
is
think
the
that's-
case.
That's my understanding of the case, but look, the reality, these two, have informed this process, so I wanna make sure I get it right.
Yes.
I'm just thinking in terms of your mention of comments coming from the West Coast,
Hmm.
it is one of the few, if not the only place where there has been an environmental assessment filing.
Yeah.
And therefore, people can actually see what's happening as opposed to a general idea of what could potentially be up for bid, which is a pretty broad stroke.
People will get that opportunity, but like I say, it goes to that different sort of parallel, I guess, process. So they will get an opportunity to see that. But you're right, everything you just said is right. I mean, we have a big wide swath of land. We'll see what companies come in with in terms of where they want to go, and then people will see how that affects them. But I will say, I have heard very, very little to no input elsewhere on what the impacts are, or how people, very generally extremely positive.
Once we get to the end of this Crown Lands bidding process, what information will be available to the public? Some of it comes through the environmental assessment process, but that's gonna take a long time, or,
Yep.
to wait for them to actually submit. Will more information come out through this process?
So what I would say, and I'm going to put the caveat on this that I'll turn to Susan and Craig, my goal, how I see this, is that any resource development, any new policy like we have here is going to be heavily scrutinized, as it should be. My goal is to have as much possible available to people. The only thing that isn't is something that's commercially sensitive under ATIPA. But I am extremely aware that if information's not there for people to look at, that leads to the skeptics, that leads to the questioning, that leads to the conspiracy theories. So I want as much as possible out there because I truly believe this to be a positive thing. I think this is a great opportunity for this province. But I also realize that people rightfully should ask questions. We have a colorful history when it comes to resource development in this province. People have a right and should ask questions. So that's never far from where we are with this, especially one like this that's extremely new. And so I keep in mind the entire time that things can change very rapidly, and we want to be prepared for that. So right now, what I would say is that in terms of public availability, I mean, the guidelines will be out there. The fiscal framework, I want it out in early January. That's the goal, because again, companies need that in order to bid. March 3rd, we see what comes in. Then it goes through those phases. But along that road, I want to have information out there. I don't want to do anything now that's going to compromise a competitive situation as well. I mean, that's not fair. I'll get myself in trouble for that. But I do think people deserve and are entitled to as much information as we can so that they can have an understanding of not just what we are doing, but why we are doing it.
Can you explain why, you talk about it having a colorful history, and a lot of that has to do with the suspicions of people being in somehow, being in on the game, ahead of the game, and obviously people are looking at world energy like that.
Yeah.
They came up with a proposal within weeks of the lifting of the moratorium. The head of Hydro at the time became part of that company. How do you alleviate people's suspicions that there's some kind of an in-game going on with that?
Well, there's a whole bunch I could say to that. And it's a good question. I'm glad you asked it because it's frustrating. Because we have been extremely transparent through this entire process. In fact, I came out last year, put this announcement out, and in fact, we were criticized for not having information out there. In fact, I got the quotes here. I said last year at that time, we will have the wind moratorium lifted. This was December. So we're going to lift it. And my quote was sooner rather than later. So anybody, I think there's a lot of people suspected at that moment where we were going to go with this. But I can't control how any individual, company, proponent does what they do. But you can look at the actions. And the actions are, and I think ATIP will bear this out and public commentary will bear this out, the process that we came out with in July you haven't seen any other company say that they feel that it's a rigged or unfair process. In fact, they all appreciated the fact that we started everybody off in the same spot. So it doesn't matter what you did before. If you had a Crown land application in, EA in, does not matter one pick to our process. We've been extremely above board. But, you know, people ask these questions, and hey, that's fair. Like, it's not me getting frustrated with the questions being asked. I just want to ensure that we have a process that stands up to, and I think it does. So when it all comes down to it, when it's all said and done, people, and again, that's why we're going to have to put the grading out and where we go with this and why we make these decisions that we make. And I'm very comfortable. I can sleep at night knowing that when we do that, individuals, well, most individuals be able to look at that and say, you know what, I get it. Might not agree with it, but I don't think any charges of people being in on it will stand up. Certainly not with me, because, you know, look, the truth is that's just foolishness with us, right? With our department, with everybody else. So I just want to reiterate that, though. I want to make that clear. I'm not faulting people for asking the questions. They have every right, and again, coming back to our history and everything else, I don't blame people one bit. But what matters is the truth and the facts. And when you look at this, it doesn't matter what you did before. Everybody started off the game at the same time. Everybody's had the exact same opportunity. We've been extremely consultative with absolutely everybody, trying to make this fair. I've met with anybody that wants to meet with me. I've met with communities. There's no one that hasn't had a chance to call, whether it's me or especially the brains of the operation that are doing the work. We've listened to everybody. So I hope that answers the question. That's sort of where I am with it. I think that, you know, if we have a process that doesn't stand up for scrutiny, we're gonna feel it. We're gonna hear for it. But it's not a fear I have, because I know we're doing these things for the right reasons and trying to make sure that it is a process that stands up.
Like you said, about a year ago, you came out with this renewable energy plan, and now we're at this stage of the process. Where do you think we'll be this time next year?
I also think I said last year I don't like to put timelines or anything out there because I can't control everything. I don't know where we're going to be in a year. If you look at the plan itself, we had short, medium, and long-term goals. There's a lot of work to do. Where I'd like to be is I'd like to see this process move along in a positive fashion. And right now, we've hit the targets pretty much. I'm very impressed with what we've set out to do, and we've achieved those. And I give the credit to the people in the department and their colleagues in other departments. I'd like to see us have awards done. And at some point, again, these people had to go through Cranton Lands and environmental assessment process. I can't say where that's going to be. I'd like to see us closer to the goal of having projects that have been awarded us by us in a conditional stage. Perhaps they've moved past that and getting into operational, or not operational, but the construction stage. I don't know. That's where I'd like to be. We also have a lot of work to do on, you know, we will take from this. This is the first time it's been done. We'll take from this and maybe put our minds towards what does the next process look like, because there is still a lot of other area that maybe did not make it through here, that there's mitigation opportunities. So similar, I keep using the example of the Marathon Mine, which most people seem pretty happy with the opportunity that comes from it. That was delayed because they ran into caribou mitigation issues where they had to work to put together a plan that addressed the concerns of wildlife and environment. Took some time, everybody worked together, they got there. So same thing here. We have some lands that didn't get through this round, but I do think have a possibility, but it just requires further time, further consultation. We have some companies that I think are looking into self-generation, heavy industrial, especially when I look at our mining opportunities. They require more power. They're asking for more power. Let's see what's possible there. So there's a lot of opportunity here, tons of opportunity, I think. Hopefully we're farther ahead than where we are now, but right now I can say, given the fact that a year ago people questioned, you know, what exactly are you doing? I think we've made a lot of progress in a year, and I'm happy with that. And we're just going to work to the best of our ability to make sure that we stay on track here. Try to be friendly and inviting of investment here, but knowing that we have a duty to citizens to not just take whatever comes here, realizing that the province has expectations, and resources come with a high expectation of value, because that's one of the things we have here is a natural, beautiful province that we want to ensure that balance again between finding a reason to stay here and that beauty that's always been here.
You mentioned caribou mitigation issues in clarifying. Mr. Risley, for one, has said that there's a climate change imperative here, and that the EA process should be kind of held in a different light because of that. In fact, he specifically said, caring about where moose cross the road. Do you think that mines and wind power and hydrogen should be weighed differently, or looked at differently?
No. No, we have an environmental process. It has to stand up to scrutiny. I get that certain people want to move fast, that's fine. But we're going to do what we got to do for the people of the province. So no, it shouldn't be treated differently. We're going to do what we have to do. Don't get me wrong. Every company that wants to come here wants things to move as quickly as possible. I would too. But at the end of the day, we've been given this opportunity and this burden of ensuring that we exercise power, policy, legislation, and responsibility. So that's on us, and we have a duty to live up to that.
In the technical briefing, we talked about, it was mentioned 73 projects had been identified. Does your department have the capacity to provide proper scrutiny of that amount of projects, given they're all going to be submitted at the same time, and you know, the race that we keep talking about, the timelines that keep coming up?
What I am going to say is yes. Yes, we do. And the reason I say that is because when you look back at last year developing that renewable energy plan and look at where we are almost a year later, this team has done amazing things in constructing a plan that is not really in existence anywhere else. So I have no reason to believe that we cannot continue to do that. But I will point out that there's obviously been a lot of changes within the department in the last few years. I think Craig may have pointed out earlier, we didn't have a renewable division. We're working on that. So we will bring in extra resources to help put this forward. But I have the utmost confidence in the team here, people back at the building, people in other departments who are not here but have been working on this. We realize that the opportunity means that we have to be responsive to industry. And so they've met every challenge that's been put at them so far. And I have no reason to believe that we won't continue to do that.
Of that number, 72 or 3.
73.
Some of them are obviously overlapping. If you get like all of the projects are submitted and they meet spec and they're approved, what is the sort of maximum that we could see awarded Crown lands in a year?
No max. I'm not going to put a max on it because that implies that there's a cap. There's no cap. Like, I mean, we'll take as many as we think are viable. At the end of the day, the ultimate discretion rests with us. We also have the ability to award none. So it can go from 0 to whatever. I don't want to say a number because then there's an expectation that you're going to get there. I hope as many viable applications come in as possible. We'd like to think that that there's enough, I guess, resource available, and all, like when we go through all the things I mentioned in terms of land, ports, wind, you know, access, you name it, that we've got multiple places and parts of this province that have expressed interest. A number of communities have done their own work to make themselves available and partner with proponents, so they want to see it. So we'll see where that goes, but that's where the review phase comes in. Because the other thing is we don't want to award something that's not going to have a chance of success, right? So there's a lot of work left to do there. And again, we got to see what, you know, we got to get that fiscal framework out to companies. That's going to drive a lot of this. I will say I've seen in other places that some companies, as they move through this, decide to partner. Maybe that happens too. That's a possibility. Who knows? I mean, to me, my only concern is having a viable, sensible process. We want to see development here. We want to see it work. We don't want to see applications that are granted that go nowhere. That's why we really want to work with companies to make it as, you know, successful.
I just want to, maybe I should have asked this in the technical briefing, but you have 31 companies, 73 projects. Obviously, some companies are proposing more than one. Can we assume that there are also overlapping bids on certain parcels of land? Yes, okay.
Yes. Yeah, you're going to see overlapping. I mean, that's part of this process. There's overlapping lands. Even in terms of the energy, there's limited capacity on the grid. Likely, what the proponents are looking for from a capacity perspective would exceed what's there. So obviously, not all those proponents are going to be able to move forward. So there are limited resources there in certain areas where there's going to be a competition to determine which proponent is awarded the opportunity to move forward.
We've been talking interchangeably about 31 land nominations, 31 companies. Is it 31 companies or 30?
It's 31 companies.
Okay.
Has anyone brought forward the prospect of using bull arm as an export port?
Can't really say. I will say that bull arm is an important asset to the province of Newfoundland and Labrador, and we'd love to see it fully utilized in any type of resource development.
Can I ask quickly just about the offshore element? How far have we proceeded in terms of that process of settling what might be other options for wind developers on the offshore side?
There's still, what I would say is there's still a lot of work to do that. So just on the resource assessment part with the federal government, there's work to be done. That whole process may be different, obviously, than onshore. Just when you look at the land itself, there's a big difference, obviously, between bidding for seabed versus, crown land on shore. So no, we haven't moved that one especially far, but we're working with the feds. There's nobody sat there from the federal perspective waiting for our input on it. There's work jointly that has to be done. And again, you look at the CNLO EB or will be EB. We have to work with them, figure out how all this is going to. I guess the best way to sum it up is that there's work done, but you're not going to see it anytime, I think, we're not moving forward that process anytime in the next 12 months, I don't think. There absolutely will be offshore development here. Mm-hmm. That part I'm very confident in. When, though, is not completely within our purview to say. So most of our internal resources have been dedicated to moving this process forward and meeting the expectations that have been laid out to us by proponents, jurisdictions, individuals, companies.
What's the biggest risk for government here going forward?
The biggest risk, in my opinion, is that this is a brand new industry that is still developing. And I always keep in the back of my mind, I think we do as a team, that we want the ability to adapt to changes as they arise as we move forward, as it relates to pricing, as it relates to demand, all these things. So there's so many things there's a lot of variables that are still there. There's a lot of uncertainty. So that's why doing anything very, very long-term poses a challenge. Mm-hmm. So that's the biggest risk, is this is still extremely, extremely new. Like, there's no one else in Canada that has a full-on hydrogen framework yet. There's no one else in North America. So we're moving fast here. And so at all points we think about, what are the off-ramps in terms of where this goes. That's in my opinion, I think. I don't know if Susan or Craig have something.
I agree.
We all good? So the last thing I would say then is, look, we have more work to do. There'll probably be more questions in January when we do put out the fiscal framework, so we'll be more than happy to sit down again then. And I would also point out that we realized that you didn't get the guidelines, as per usual, the guidelines, you're just getting it. So if questions come up out of the guideline review that you do, we're happy to answer them. We'll be happy to do what we have to do to talk more about this. And on that note, thank you, folks. Everybody
Thank
take
you.
care.
Thank you.